Thanks for checking out this highlight from the Casually Hardcore podcast. If you want to check out the full podcast after the show, please be sure to hit the top link in the description. But now, let's do it.
No, I mean, I actually think that's super cool, Chris, because the thing is that when it comes down to it, especially MMOs as a genre, right? Like storytelling in MMOs and that RPG element, but it sets them apart in the genre a lot. Because when it comes down to it, a lot of MMOs, the two major things, especially now that we're seeing, it is mechanical, and then story can be a big sort of, I don't know, parallel thing that's happening with that, right? So having players that relate to either, it's totally valid. I know so many people who, for whatever reasons, don't like the stories of MMOs or skip them. I do think in the case of something like Final Fantasy, it's interesting to examine both sides because the story is really unique in it in 14. And the mechanical element is hugely crucial to the entire experience that you have of the game, the combat, the gameplay, the content type. Like, you can't have one without the other, and like ignoring either as being something that's a valid drive in MMOs is just kind of silly. You know, it's like, you have to acknowledge that both of them make up the landscape of modern current MMOs and what players might be wanting from them.
I like the diversity in offering that. One of the things I've said about 14, and I received a lot of hate for it, or at least a lot of pushback originally, even though I feel like my statements have become what people have adopted when they describe it. It's that it's a Final Fantasy game first, and then it's an MMO. It's an RPG MMO rather than an MMORPG. It's like it invites you into that single player narrative driven experience so you can have that. And then if you want to stick around for the MMO, then you can. It offers both of those options to players. The question is that we can always sit here and debate what is the right balance of that. And when we look at Shadowbringers versus like ARR, Shadowbringers has the trust system, ARR doesn't. So there's currently, I would say, a disconnect in that Final Fantasy, story-driven experience that kind of forces you into multiplayer and then eventually kind of dials that back to where you can kind of have that more of a solo player experience and then jump into the end game if you choose. But there's a great, population of this game that comes for the expansion, plays through the story, comes back to prior to the next expansion, gets caught up on the story, plays the expansion, and that's how they enjoy 14, and that's not wrong to do that, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when it comes to telling stories that I think are more diverse, like, Chris, you're like, I don't think my character would make those decisions. And in my head, I was like, that's what role play is for. And it's amazing to see how people even expand the world in this story. And I agree with you. Like 14 as a game right now in the landscape of storytelling and MMOs, it is probably the most restrictive. And we've seen them try to do little things with that, like offering some dialogue flair, offering maybe a few little choices of story diversion and like the Beast Tribes and the Nier thing. We've seen little bits of that. But there are definitely other MMOs that I think have taken that concept of like, okay, granted, we have to get everybody to the same place, just like you said. But how do we at least offer a feeling of being able to choose? How do we offer some sort of illusion of choice or something that does actually affect things? And I think the two that I do that best, in my personal opinion, are actually SWTOR, even though SWTOR has its own problems. Probably SWTOR and ESO right now, because there are things that, you can make choice-wise that do affect what's happening. And in Elder Scrolls, they have the luxury of not being essentially a linear story. They're more zone stories where you're kind of going in and you're playing through an arc, and there's these side quests and there are decisions you can make where a character will live or die or this or that. But they're not trying to weave it all together into one concurrent thing. It's not like, oh, in my game, I let Alphinaud die. I let him drown. Oops. And now at the end of the game, he's not there in Final Fantasy 14. Like, you just can't do that with 14's story.
Right. You could at least get us to the point where we all agree that the boss we're going to fight needs to die. But some of us, it's a needs to die, and some of us we get to kill them. Like, we don't have to get there with the same feeling of emotion. There are times where I go into a boss fight where I understand why we're fighting. I'm not really thrilled we're here. And there are other times where it's like, long time coming, man. Long time coming. Like, let's do this. And so I think I would appreciate them doing some of that. I know as they've tried to get into that, one of the things the 14 community likes about the game is that you can do everything. And so when you introduce agency by its very nature, We saw that with the role actions, right? People, well, choose any 3 of 10, but I want all 10. Like, as a community, we've gotten so accustomed to all characters can be all things that when they give you choice, for there to be choice, for choice to be meaningful, that has to mean that there's a road not taken for your choice. And what I like about that as an option, I understand why we don't like it. That's an easy one. But what I like about it is this game is like a running convention. When you go to a convention, when you go to BlizzCon or FanFest or any of these things, what's awesome is being around people that have a different life experience than you. Being around somebody who shows up as a cosplayer versus somebody who's there with a notepad to take notes about the battle changes, all being there to care about the same thing is so cool that I don't want 20 million players that are exactly me. Like, I love that we have 20 million players who are all drastically different than me. And there's going to be overlap, but I like that we all can enjoy this same thing. And I'll be interesting to see if they do anything different with the story in 6.1, because I don't know. I know Aetheryte Radio, you guys have like some longer format chances, but like, what is your kind of summed up thoughts on what's happening with the story that we're ending it in 6.0 and then we're going to just jumpstart this thing?
I'm not scared. I mean, like, so many people, it's so funny to me because I play multiple MMOs. Whenever you hear the words like, yes, the major story arc is coming to an end, immediately it's like half the internet is on fire and everybody's like, the game is dead. And you're like, no, what? No, you can't have a story that goes forever. It got to stop at some point. We got to start a new one. And so it's always so funny to me when people get so worried and so anxious. Like right now in both Final Fantasy 14 and Guild Wars 2, we had the season of Shadow last X-Pack go around. Now we have the season of the end. So we have Endwalker, End of Dragons. I'm curious to see what happens with other MMO X-Packs. But I mean, I think the story has come, it feels like it's time. You know, I think that they've done such a phenomenal job. Oh my God. We've talked about it so much on Aetheryte Radio. My tears are all over YouTube, you know, like with 5.3 and with everything else. Like, the story has been so beautiful. And I think that that's in no small part thanks to Ishikawa, who has, you know, been leading the main scenario writing. And she is just an incredible powerhouse when it comes to compelling characters and story. And I think that right now is really a great time for us to bring this particular arc, not all of Final Fantasy 14, right? But this particular arc to a close. And especially, it's not just the fact that it's been 10 years, right? And that was sort of their goal. It's also the fact that they have an incredible writing team, that the game is reaching new heights, that we have had some of the like most incredible story beats, and I think some really fantastic content. We've seen so much evolve and change in the game. This feels like a really good point for us to kind of bring some closure to this journey that many people have been taking even since 1.0, and then start something new and see what the future looks like for 14 as we start this sort of new rising sun, you know, as they kind of use the metaphor in the announcement. But
how does that make you feel about the gameplay? Like, as we look at the Ultimate getting pushed, as somebody who does some of the higher end content, effectively, if we only get 2 next expansion, Dragonsong War wasn't moved, it was cut. Because if you do the math, we will have had this many expansions and we won't have had like you can say the next one's Dragonsong War, but this one should have been Dragonsong War.
Yeah. I think this time around, we were actually just talking about this on stream the other day. I think this time around, it's been an unfortunate confluence of things, right? I think that you have to acknowledge that both sides of this debate that we've seen kind of rage about Ultimate in particular, right? There are 2 valid thoughts on this, right? One, it's a tiny portion of the population that does it. Do we have to look at overall balance of other content in the game? Yes, valid. Are people rightfully upset? Yes, valid. And I think a lot of that is exacerbated by just what was planned for this patch cycle, right? When we look at the features in Final Fantasy 14 that make up this game and set it apart from other games on the market, which it's important to acknowledge that stuff, right? The end game content is a huge part of it. Ultimate being some of the hardest content in any MMO right now, hugely important, aspirational content. But in addition to that, we also have things like crafters and gatherers, which in Final Fantasy 14, unlike most other MMOs, have their own quests, their own rotations, their own skill set, their own content. Like, that is something that is unique about 14. And so to take this particular expansion patch cycle and be like, well, we haven't really done anything with this system that we have that's like really unique in this game. And if we're going to have this, we should probably do endgame content for it. We should probably do some stuff for it and rework it and make it functional for the future. I mean, it was already functional, but you know what I mean? Smoothing it out a little bit for new players and things. So they kind of overloaded some of the patch cycles with a lot of this big stuff. Ishgard, both of the beast tribes that are crafter gatherer, all these different things, diadem, ocean fishing. We got much needed content, but when we also were getting one dungeon less per patch, when we also, didn't even have like Hildebrand for like additional trials or whatever, when we didn't have, we had that whole one patch where it wasn't a new primal, it was the like sapphire weapon instant, like people who are feeling the frustration of not having PvE content, which like I will gladly say is me. I don't care much for the crafting gathering in 14. I think it's cool. I like housing, but I just don't like spending massive hours doing crafting and gathering. And I love people who do. It's just not something that has always drawn me. So I felt a little bit of that, right? So I think you have to pay attention to all of that to understand why then Ultimate players were upset, and especially content creators, right? People who might have scheduled around this event, who, it brings the community together. It brings great visibility to the game. It is something, there's like so many facets to this, essentially. Welcome to my TED Talk. But you can't like just say that people being upset came out of nowhere and has no bearing, because there are reasons that exacerbated it. And I do agree that it's real rough to know that that content's not coming. It's not in one patch. It's like in a year, A year.
People aren't doing the math. They're basing it on like, well, expansions only drop in the summer, and so it's no big deal. And they're not doing the math because of the delay. Cut it out of the whole 2021.
Yeah, so that's tough. But we also did get stuff. I mean, like, I really thought that Delibram Reginae was a great, oh man, I think this is such a cool new piece of content. Like, so there's good stuff that's happened. I'm just hoping for the future we maybe see, as they've kind of gotten through what they want to do for some crafting gathering stuff, they have an idea for the future. We see more of a balance. Like, that's the main thing. I'm okay with it being delayed. There's lots of other stuff to do in this game. It's like, I'll play some other MMOs, but I understand why people are frustrated, and it does create this weird gap, and it's like, yeah, I hope we get more balance moving forward.
Would you like to see something like where Guild Wars 2 has that like continually leveling? Obviously it's more glamour focused with the that, because that's one of the things that I really want. We asked Yoshi P about it. It's like, can we get some kind of glamour level so that XP always has some value? You level up, here's a treasure coffer, or here's 100 of the Boshin lockbox, just some kind of like, thanks for getting an XP's worth of a level's worth of XP by doing the content. Would you like that kind of system in 14?
Yes like I would. So many other MMOs have it. You brought up Guild Wars 2. So like you have your level cap, right? Where you do your vertical progression to level cap. And then you have the mastery system, which is your horizontal progression. So like you get mastery points from a bunch of different things, from achievements, from rating, from map interaction, from doing special things on different, metas, which are like culminative event chain sort of things. Like you're able to continue sort of building off of that. ESO, same thing. They have champion point system, which then allows you to have an account-wide sort of buff system that will apply to any future characters you make, which like, please, Final Fantasy 14, because then it makes it easier when you make an alt. It's like you get that bit of like bonus damage, power, healing, whatever it is that you're trying to do. It's so nice. I do think 14 could benefit from that. The way that they've kind of balanced it is that they introduce new classes that you then level. You try to get everything to 80, but it's not quite the same. And account-wide stuff in 14 hasn't really been a strong suit in the game. We could have a bit more of that.
To the point where they said that they actually built the game with a limited number of account-wide item codes. Yeah. And so they have to be careful. Sometimes they're like, yeah, we thought about that item being account-wide, and then we decided not to because we can't use one of our diminishing resource, right? Like we're out in space on this journey, and it's like, why did we not bring a machine that makes this thing? Like we have a finite number of bottles of champagne here. Like I know it's a big moment, but we can't celebrate this one because there's no making more of these. And every other game's like, what do you mean there's a limited number of codes?
No, it's so weird.
And they say it like it's some justifiable thing. Like we've all been there. we all, of course, have a limited use car. No, I don't. Like, and they're just like, we can all relate. That's just you, man. That's a you thing. And it's so baked into the foundation that it's so hard to fix.
Yeah, but it creates these weird issues, you know? Like, I remember when I first got into 14, I was so excited because I wanted every glamour item that ever existed ever. So I was like, I'm going to go to the cash shop. I'm going to pay my real money. And this was big for me because I've been very hesitant previously about spending money on an MMO, which now I'm like, oh my gosh, I understand this so much better. But coming from being a single player, you know, sort of RPG person, I was like, I don't want to give them more money than I have to. And so my big first step into like, no, I'd like to support this ongoing game was that I went to the Mog Station and I bought every hairstyle that existed on the Mog Station. And I was like, and now I'm set. And then I made a new character and I was like, where my hair at? And like, I did not
this
realize.
Lunar Whale won't be account wide. Like, you know it. People are going to be pissed. And there is a 99% chance that just our luck. And they're going to make it $5 billion. And it's like, we got a $5,000 mount and it's one character. I'm not saying that actually, that's not confirmed. It probably is. But like, just in my head, the pessimist in me is like, oh yeah, this is a moment. This is a moment where friction could be created needlessly. Like, this is just a moment where everything's going great and we're all excited. And they announce Lunar Whale and they're like, so it's $400 and it's a one-time use. It spawns into the game and it's actually a right click, left click. And if you don't do both, it deletes itself. Why?
So terrible.
Why? Like, why? Yeah, sorry. And we're getting overwhelmed with tickets. That's totally unforeseen. And we just can't respond to everybody right now. Like, it's just, it just feels like every once in a while there's something where they just fall and it's needless because everything else is going so well. Shadowbringers has been phenomenal as an expansion. The Ultimate News just felt like what an unfortunate misstep at a time when like we're going into the hypest cycle. We are excited where we're going and we're excited where we are. And not every MMO gets to experience a Venn diagram of being in a good place and going to a good place. Like, a lot of times it's every other expansion everybody's happy with. To be in a good expansion, going into what feels like a good direction is a really exciting moment. And so when anything's less than perfect, it just,
Yeah, it's funny to me with the Ultimate debate in particular, because to me, and again, like with pandemic, it's been driving me crazy lately. People that are like, you know, devs are using the pandemic as an excuse for not doing things in game. And I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure it's a pandemic.
That is,
and we've never seen this.
That is a huge pet peeve for me as a dev. You know, it's like, I honestly wish that like, it's perfectly fine to be critical of design structure, leadership, like how the tasks are doled out and prioritized. But I like, honestly, and I'm not going to sit here and say you can't be critical of it, but I just want somebody to go be in that environment for 2 to 3 years and then come back and be like, you know what? It's freaking hard to do this. Like, there's so many things. And it's like, but I get it. Like, it's easy to sit here and just say, I just get frustrated with the devs are lazy kind of comment. Also, dead game. Dead game also is something that kind of annoys me. I wish that was something that we could just get from our lexicon. I want to kind of touch on that and then I'll let you talk because like it is such a pet peeve because at the core of it, like I think the dead game is such a personal statement as opposed to a global kind of thing because it's that I would say if a server shuts down, that's a whole different topic, but typically people use it because it's like whatever, like they rode the hype train, that they were there for that and then they decided to move on. That's perfectly fine, but dead game and lazy devs are just two things that are just kind of like light a fire into my butt and be like, okay, let's dive into that thought. Let's explore it. Let's explore it for a minute, you know? I hope that you really enjoyed that highlight, and I hope that you check out the full podcast. Again, link is in the description. Thanks for being here, and I hope you have a fantastic day, you wonderful, beautiful individual.